In 1967, they took a skinny Navy kid from the States, stuffed him into green fatigues, slapped a bag of bandages on his shoulder, and told him he was now responsible for a bunch of Marines in First Corps, up near this little coastal ville that smelled like fish sauce, wood smoke, and cordite, depending on the day. That's how a sailor ends up walking everywhere instead of riding a ship, in case you ever wondered. The Marines didn't care what my paperwork said. To them, I wasn't hospital corpsman, third class, so-and-so. I was just Doc. Once that word lands on you out there, it sticks. You wear it heavier than the gear. Our AO was a patchwork of paddies and low hills north of Da Nang, a place where the sea breeze died around mid-morning and the heat just sat on you like a wet blanket. The first patrols were almost disappointing in a stupid way. We stepped off in column, rifles up, eyes big, hearts hammering, waiting for the jungle movie ambush that never came. What we got instead were blisters, twisted ankles, and the glorious spectacle of grown men discovering leeches in places you really don't want leeches. I'd walk along in the middle of the squad, aid bag thumping my back, listening to them grumble. "Hey, Doc, you sure this is a war and not some messed-up camping trip?" one of the lance corporals would say. I'd grin and tap my bag. "You get shot? I'll make it feel like a camping trip, I promise." Back then, that kind of joke counted as a safety net. I ran what I liked to call jungle sick call in any scrap of shade we could find when the lieutenant decided we were static for more than 10 minutes. Guys would line up. Trench foot, jungle rot, heat rash, diarrhea from drinking water they swore they'd iodined. I'd smear cream on feet, tape hot spots, pass out salt tablets, nag them about changing socks. It sounds small, but out there, keeping a man on his feet was the difference between him covering your flank or becoming another problem to carry. I felt competent, useful. My world was fevers and blisters, not bullet holes and sucking chest wounds. Training took care of the other stuff, I told myself. If it came, I'd handle it. The officers made sure to remind me where I fit into the grand machine. One day, the company CO called me over while we were in this half-rotten schoolhouse being used as a temporary CP. He tapped the Geneva Convention card in my pocket like it was a joke. "Doc, you remember your priorities, right?" he said. I nodded. "Marines first. Our Marines. Our ARVN, if you can get to them. Everybody else, if you have time and it doesn't risk the mission. You're not a free clinic. You're a combat multiplier." I repeated it back to him like a good sailor, and he sent me on my way. At the time, it sounded professional. Later, it would sound different. With the grunts, I kept it simple. I had a line I used all the time, a little talisman against what we were all afraid of. "You get hit, you scream, 'Doc,' and you stay down. I'll get to you before St. Peter does." They'd laugh, smack my helmet, call me an arrogant Navy bastard. Somehow promising to beat heaven to their bodies made everyone breathe a little easier. It made me feel like I had more control than I really did. We walked through villages the way weather passes over a landscape. Women stopped pounding rice to watch us. Old men smoked and pretended not to stare. Kids ran alongside shouting, "GI! GI!" even when we told them we were Marines, not Army. Every so often we'd pass a child with a cough that rattled his whole chest, or an old woman limping, ankle swollen, eyes pleading. The corpsman in me, the one from school, wanted to stop. Reach into the bag, do something. The Marines in front of me kept walking, rifles at low ready, scanning windows and hedgerows. I'd look at the lieutenant, and he'd give the smallest shake of his head. Not our mission. Not today. I'd tell myself, next time, when we've got more time, I'll come back with a med cap and do it right. Out there, next time was a dangerous phrase to lean on. At night, in whatever hole or hooch we called home for those hours, I'd take stock. Count canteens, count bandages, count morphine syrettes. Then I'd count my Marines. One fire team, then another. I learned their names, their hometowns, the way they walked when they were tired or scared. I thought that was my job. Know my guys, keep them patched together, maybe hand out a few malaria pills to village kids when nobody was looking, and go home with a good record and a clear conscience. The big stuff, airstrikes, free fire zones, civilians caught between lines, that was for officers and staff and people with maps. I had no idea yet how small my neat little circle of responsibility really was. I thought being a corpsman meant knowing who my patients were. Back then, I figured it was anyone in green with an eagle, globe, and anchor. The day I stopped thinking of myself as a jungle clinic and started understanding what my bag was really for began like 100 briefings before it. We were going to sweep a contested hamlet inland from the coast. A little clump of thatch and palms the intel guys said was likely VC influenced. Likely. In Vietnam, that meant pack extra ammo. We stepped off just after sunrise, moving along the dikes between paddies, the air already hot enough to make your helmet band itch. The village sat on a slight rise. Kids, chickens, a couple of water buffalo, looked like any other place we'd walked through. The lieutenant was up front with the point squad, the rest of us in file. I was somewhere in the middle, counting helmets, listening to the familiar soundtrack of equipment clinking, boots sucking in mud, somebody humming under his breath to pretend he wasn't scared. I remember thinking, if this goes bad, it'll be the usual. 1 or 2 guys, maybe a booby trap. I was wrong. The ambush started with a noise my body recognized before my brain did. A single long burst of machine gun fire tearing in from our right, too loud and too close to be anything but real. Then an RPG slammed into a tree line ahead of the lead squad and blew half the foliage into the air. The world snapped from hot and lazy to screaming in less than a second. Men dove for cover. Some just disappeared in the first volley. The lieutenant hit the mud, yelling for fire teams to peel left, right, anywhere but standing still. I heard the word that always locked my muscles into motion. Doc! It came out high and thin from somewhere up front. The rest of the sound, M16s barking, people cursing, rounds snapping overhead, blurred into a thick wall as I ran toward the voice. The first casualty was behind a low berm, lying on his back, eyes huge, both hands clamped over his thigh. Blood was pumping through his fingers in bright spurts, soaking into the mud. Training picked me up and moved my hands for me. I dropped to my knees, ripped his hands away, slapped a battle dressing on the wound, then tightened a tourniquet high and hard until he screamed and then cursed and then went very quiet, teeth gritted. "You're not dying today, Marine," I told him, because that's what you're supposed to say, and because I needed to believe it as much as he did. I jabbed morphine into his arm, marked the M on his forehead with a pen, shouted for a couple of guys to drag him back to cover. As they hauled him off, another voice hit my ears. "Doc, over here! 2 of them!" I spun and saw another Marine face down in the paddy, not moving, and next to him, a kid clutching his side, blood seeping between his fingers. 2 patients, 1 pair of hands. I slid to the kid first, the one making noise. His breathing was ragged, but he was conscious, eyes tracking me. I rolled him enough to see an entry wound in his flank, no obvious spurting. I stuffed a dressing in, wrapped him sloppy but tight, told him to keep pressure with his own hand. Then I crawled to the one who wasn't moving. tapped his helmet. Nothing. Rolled him over and saw it right away. Half his chest caved in, no rise, eyes half open, but not seeing. I checked for a pulse even though I knew better. Nothing. Somewhere behind me, an ARVN interpreter was yelling in broken English and Vietnamese, "Medic! Medic!" on their flank, their own wounded piling up. At the same time, mortar rounds started walking in, short pops, and then heavy thuds that kicked mud and water over us. Shrapnel hissed past like angry bees. I remember flattening myself. Over the living Marine for a second, trying to cover him as much as treat him, feeling the shockwave of a round smack into the paddy 20 meters away. My ears rang, my hands kept moving, check airway, check bleeding, reassure, move on. Some part of me registered ARVN soldiers dragging their injured back toward us, one of them with half his face bandaged already, shouting, "Baxi! Baxi!" their word for doctor. I didn't go to them. I heard them, I saw them, but I stayed with my Marines because that's what the CO's speech in the schoolhouse had drilled into my skull. Marines first, combat power, mission. The math of it burned itself in somewhere deep. The first one who actually died in my arms wasn't the quiet Marine in the paddy. He was already gone. It was another kid I'd patched up enough to move, fragment in his chest, breath whistling. We got him to a little hollow behind a dike, other wounded beside him, and I did everything the book said. Occlusive dressing, position, morphine, talked to him so he stayed with me. He was the same one who'd been joking over sea rations that morning about how he'd take a little scratch for a ticket home. He looked at me and said, "Doc, don't let me be messed up. Don't let me go home messed up." I told him he'd be fine. A minute later, his eyes rolled a little, his chest rose once, then didn't. My hand was on his shoulder when he left. I didn't need to check a pulse that time either. I knew. Eventually, the firing slackened, like somebody slowly turning down a radio. The lieutenant called for a medevac, popped smoke, did his job. I did mine until there was nothing left for my hands to do. When it was over, he found me standing in a puddle, hands shaking, covered in other people's blood. He slapped my helmet. "Hell of a job today, Doc. You saved a lot of Marines." I nodded, because I didn't know what else to do. Later, I knelt by an irrigation ditch and scrubbed my hands until the skin felt raw and the water ran clear. I told myself it was just one bad day, the first real one, and that the odds were in our favor for a while. I hadn't learned yet that in Vietnam, days like that travel in packs.
We were working with ARVN that day, which already made everything feel twice as complicated. 2 chains of command, 2 radios, 2 sets of officers who barely trusted each other but were supposed to move like one body. The village we were headed toward was one we'd heard about for weeks. VC staging point, heavily influenced. All those phrases that really meant, there are people with guns there who don't want you around. Marines on one side of the line, ARVN on the other, pushing up along parallel dikes toward the same cluster of thatched roofs. It went bad fast. One minute we were slogging through ankle-deep water, grumbling about leeches and the smell. The next, the whole tree line on the far side of the hamlet lit up. Automatic fire raked across the paddies, rounds smacking into water and mud with that sick, heavy sound. Someone on our left screamed and dropped. Another Marine spun around like someone had yanked his shoulder. Almost at the same time, the ARVN line got hit from a different angle. RPG flash, then a boom that rolled across the fields. Their voices carried over in a mix of Vietnamese and panicked English. "Medic! Medic!" My world shrank to a dip in the earth behind a dike, where we decided, in that first scramble, this is the casualty point. It wasn't a conscious plan, it was just the lowest place where men naturally dragged the wounded. After that, they came in waves. First, a Marine with a sucking chest wound, gasping like a fish, pink foam bubbling at his lips. I dropped beside him, tore his flak open, slapped an occlusive dressing over the hole, and rolled him to help his good lung work. Before I even finished taping it down, 2 others staggered in carrying an ARVN soldier with blood squirting from his thigh in bright, ugly arcs. Arterial. I started counting without even realizing it. 1 chest, 1 femoral, 2 more waiting behind them. Somewhere behind that, villagers crying. Someone pushed a man in black pajamas toward us, hands tied, a bloody bandage on his leg, and a sign around his neck in marker. VC. The radio on the lieutenant's back crackled that we had a medevac inbound. 1 bird, limited space. That was the phrase. Limited space. Like we were loading cargo, not people. The lieutenant knelt beside me, shouting over the noise. "Doc, we've got 4 litter spots, maybe. Pick who goes." The ARVN captain barged into our little hollow, jabbering, pointing at his man with the shredded leg. "My soldier! My soldier!" he kept saying. Then something in rapid Vietnamese I didn't need translated. Behind him, 2 villagers stumbled in. An old woman and a boy, both peppered with shrapnel. The boy holding his stomach with both hands, eyes wide with animal fear. I looked around that little patch of mud and bodies and did what the manuals and the lectures had drilled into me. I triaged. The Marine with the chest wound got a spot on the bird. He still had a chance with real surgery. The ARVN with the arterial bleed, once I got the tourniquet on and the bleeding slowed, got another. He was a fighter we could save and send back to the line. A Marine with a bad arm and a villager with a leg full of metal shards got bandages, morphine, and a promise someone would check them when the next bird came. The prisoner tagged VC got his tourniquet tightened and a heel keep from the lieutenant. The boy with his hands clamped over his belly, crying softly in a language I barely understood, got a field dressing and my hand on the back of his neck. When he tried to follow the others toward the helicopter, his mother grabbed him and pulled him back, wailing. The bird came in low, rotor wash throwing mud into our faces, door gunner scanning the tree line while we shoved our chosen 4 onto litters and ran them to the skids. Everyone else stayed behind, small and suddenly very quiet in the fading rotor thunder. We went back to work. More dressings, more improvised splints, more whispered lies. "You're going to be okay. They'll send another bird." The firefight finally died down, like somebody turning down the volume on a bad radio station. The ARVN captain clapped my shoulder, told me I was a good doctor. The lieutenant said I'd done exactly the right thing, that I'd prioritized combat effectiveness under pressure. That night, though, it wasn't the ones who got on the helicopter that I saw when I closed my eyes. It was the boy with his hands over his stomach, the old woman rocking back and forth, the prisoner watching me with this flat, exhausted stare. They told me I'd made the right call, that I'd followed training and math. Out there in that field, it felt like I'd just decided whose story kept going and whose stopped in the mud. Back at the company CP, they made it sound like something worth framing. We were all filthy and half-deaf when they called me into this half-collapsed hooch we were using as a command post. The skipper was there, the battalion surgeon too, both of them with that tight, tired look officers get when they're trying to act like grown-ups for the kids. The surgeon read from a paper somebody had already started drafting. "Corpsman performed efficient triage under fire," he said. "Calm, decisive, prioritized critical casualties, facilitated rapid evacuation." The skipper nodded along and clapped me on the shoulder like I'd just won a prize. I remember staring at his hand on my flak jacket and thinking, calm? Is that what that looked like from the outside? That night I couldn't shut it off. I lay in my poncho liner listening to the jungle hum and the random pop of somebody's cigarette, and the whole day played back like a bad film loop. Not the parts they put in the report, not me shouting orders or waving the medevac crew in. The other parts. The ARVN soldier with the grey face, and the tourniquet I tightened last, because he wasn't ours. The village woman who'd reached out and grabbed my sleeve while I was stepping over her to get to a Marine with a better chance. The prisoner in black pajamas, the one with VC scrawled on cardboard around his neck, clutching his own bloody tourniquet and watching me like he wanted to ask a question and knew it wouldn't matter. I realized somewhere in there that I was counting them. One Marine on the bird with the chest wound, one ARVN with the leg that wouldn't stop bleeding, one more Marine who got morphine and a promise, 2 villagers with bandages and no ride, one prisoner who got whatever was left. The numbers sat in my head, shuffling, rearranging themselves into different orders. What if I'd switched these 2? What if I'd squeezed one more on the helicopter, left someone else behind? Every version ended with somebody dying in the mud while I walked past. It didn't stop when the sun came up. On the next patrol, I caught myself counting the squad as we moved out. 1, 2, 3, 4, checking gear, boots, faces. If the shooting starts again, which one goes down first? Which one can I reach? Who do I drag? Who do I tell to wait? In the village, I did it with civilians without meaning to. Old man with a limp, kid with a cough, woman carrying a baby. Who lives? Who doesn't? If everything goes sideways right now. A few days later, I mentioned it to an older corpsman back at Battalion Aid. I tried to explain how it felt, the counting, the walking past. He just shook his head and said, "You can't save everybody, Doc. That's the job." Then he lit a cigarette and changed the subject. Maybe that settled it for him. For me, it just put a label on the thing I was already stuck with. On paper, I was the man who'd stayed cool under fire. In my head, I was just the guy who knew exactly how many people he'd stepped around to get to the ones who made the report look good. Coming home was strange because it all looked so normal. Airports, plastic chairs, bored clerks. I had a duffel bag over my shoulder, high and tight haircut, and a head full of things I couldn't put on the customs form. The Navy handed me papers, a ticket, and a welcome back, like I'd just finished a long training course. On the plane, some guy in a suit asked if I'd been over there, like Vietnam was a vague direction. I said yes. He nodded and said, "Must be glad to be done with the action," and went back to his magazine. At first, the questions were almost funny. "You see much action? Did you patch up a lot of guys? Did you save anybody?" People wanted short answers, something that fit between sips of coffee. I had short answers ready. Yeah. Some. I did my job. A few. The real answers were longer and had faces attached, so I kept those to myself. When someone said, "Bet you're just happy to be back where it's safe," I smiled and nodded, but my brain was already scanning the room out of habit. That never really stopped. In restaurants, I'd sit down facing the door without thinking. I'd clock the exits, the distance to the kitchen, which table had kids, which table had older folks who'd need help standing up. In church, in movie theaters, in crowded stores, my head would start doing its automatic math. If something happened right now, who do I grab first? Who bleeds out before I can get to them? I knew how crazy it sounded, so I never said it out loud. It was just background noise, the way some people hum to themselves. The woman I married noticed before I did. We'd be in the middle of a conversation in the living room, and she'd suddenly stop and say, "Where are you right now? Because you're not here." I'd argue, tell her I was listening, repeat back what she'd said to prove it. But she was right. Part of me was still in that field behind the dike, walking past people to get to other people. She'd reach for my hand and sometimes I'd flinch, not because I didn't want to be touched, but because for a split second I was back in a pile of bodies, searching for a pulse. I tried working in healthcare again. It made sense on paper. Experience, training, a way to do some good without carrying a rifle. But the first time I smelled a certain disinfectant in a hospital hallway, my stomach rolled. The first time I heard someone say, "We can only take critical cases right now," my hands started to shake. One night in the ER, a kid came in pale and wide-eyed, and for a moment it wasn't fluorescent lights and a clean gurney. It was a rice paddy and a torn shirt and that same look. I finished my shift, went home, and sat in the dark for a long time. Sometimes I wondered if I should have stayed Navy, gone career, turned the whole thing into a story I told at retirements and reunions. Sometimes I wondered if I even deserved to keep the title Doc when there were so many I'd walked past. In the back of my closet there's a box with my old corpsman kit, my NAM medal, a citation or two. I haven't thrown it away, but I don't open it either. It just sits there, like a patient I never finished with. People talk about bringing back souvenirs from the war. I didn't bring back a helmet or a rifle. I brought back a habit I can't shake. Even in the quietest places, I was still sorting people into who I could reach and who would be gone before I got there. Vietnam came home with me as numbers, not medals. I'm an old man now. My knees crack when I get out of a chair, my hands aren't as steady as they used to be, and the only uniform I wear is a flannel shirt and sweatpants. The war lives mostly in paperwork these days. VA forms, medical records, an occasional letter from some unit association asking for dues. Once in a while I'll go down to the VA and sit in a waiting room full of guys my age, all of us pretending we're just there for blood pressure or a bad back. We talk about football and grandkids. We don't talk much about the days when we were all a lot faster and the stakes were a lot higher. One evening I was flipping channels and landed on a documentary about Vietnam. There I was again, in black and white, only it wasn't me. It was some other medic kneeling in the mud over a kid with his shirt cut open, working like his hands could outrun God. The narrator talked about triage procedures and medevac efficiency, while they showed footage of rice paddies and burning hooches. I sat there on my couch with a blanket over my knees and felt my chest tighten. They showed a village that looked a lot like the one where I'd set up my little casualty collection point. Kids in torn clothes, women holding on to each other. The voice on the TV called it collateral damage. I remembered their faces, not their category. Years after the war, I met a Vietnamese family at church. They'd come over in the 80s, lived a couple of states away, ended up in our town because a cousin knew someone. Their little boy took to me for some reason, maybe because I slipped him candy when his parents weren't looking. One summer they invited us to a picnic. The kids ran around in the park, playing tag between the trees, shouting in the same mix of English and Vietnamese I used to hear out by the paddies. I caught myself counting them without thinking. 1, 2, 3, 4. Who would I grab first if something went wrong? Then I had to laugh at myself, quietly, because nothing was going wrong. It was just kids and sunshine and potato salad. But the habit was still there, like an old scar you forget about until the weather changes. I've never gone back to Vietnam, but sometimes I wonder what those fields look like now. Maybe there's a road where our dikes were. Maybe there's a factory where that village stood. I think about the Marines I treated, the ARVN we dragged in when we had a spare hand, the villagers who never showed up on any report, the ones we tagged as VC who were just boys same age as mine when he shipped off to college. The war turned them into categories and priorities, but in my head, they're still individuals. One with a chipped tooth, one who always carried dried fish in his pocket, one who wouldn't stop apologizing while I wrapped his leg. People sometimes ask me, usually after a beer or two, "So how many did you save, Doc?" They mean well. They want a number, something neat and clean. I don't have one. I know how many medals they pinned on me, how many lines they wrote in an after-action report, but that's not the same thing. The truth is, I still count them. The ones I reached in time, the ones I didn't, and the ones nobody ever bothered to write down.
If you've made it this far, thank you. These stories take time to tell, and even longer to understand. You've just walked through the memories of men who were never supposed to be remembered. If their voices meant something to you, if even one line stayed behind when the sound faded, don't let it disappear. Give this video a like, share it with someone who still believes history belongs to the living, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next story. Every episode here is another page, another life, another truth pulled out of the smoke. Drop a comment too, not for the algorithm, but for the conversation. Tell me what you felt, or what you remember hearing from your own fathers, grandfathers, uncles, or friends. That's how these memories stay alive. Subscribe, stay with us, and let's keep turning the pages together.